Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the Genie Vlogger, and welcome back to another Professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I will be reacting to Drew Durnil reacting to my video. But with that said, let's jump into the video.
All right, let's
Today I'm going to finally learn about my ancestry because I don't really know a whole lot. I know my family can be traced back somewhere to like England, Scotland, Wales, and maybe some Nordic countries. This video is called Uncovering Drew Durnil's Danish Immigration Ancestry. I let Jarrett Ross here, a professional genetic genealogist, dive deep into my family's history. I'm a little scared. I don't really know what's going to pop up. I guess I'm Danish though.
1851, Falster Island,
Again.
Denmark.
Oh, wow.
A 16-year-old
I'm already so shocked about this. I will be honest, I don't remember really hearing much about my family's history. I know my grandma was born in Salt Lake City and was maybe a part of a Mormon family.
A musician named Hans is walking home after being the lone musician to play music at a party in a nearby town.
Nice.
Something he had been doing
Based?
since the age of 12.
Guessing that I have some sort of relation to this man, maybe.
Founded in America, for
Correct.
which they had just finished translating their religious texts
So this is
to Danish.
Really? So this is a Mormon traveling to Denmark.
This new religion was quite intriguing to Han.
I don't know anything about Mormonism. Like, maybe my grandma does, but I don't.
Travel over 5,200 miles to build a new life.
I just know the basic stuff.
He sent me his DNA results and a basic family tree, and then I was off researching.
Man, this
As
is so
I was
cool.
reviewing what he sent me, I quickly noticed something interesting with Drew's tree. When Drew was born, he not only had 5 great-grandparents still alive,
Wow.
but he also had
yes. Like I said, I lived with my great-grandma, this lady, Vera Mae Russell.
second great-grandmothers alive as well.
She lived for a long time, so I've always been super thankful for that.
So I decided to ask him what he knew about this line of his family.
Oh, yeah.
So I consider myself to be extremely lucky
I just
because
covered
I
all
was
this.
fortunate at a young age to live with.
I have to say, I was blown away by some of the age gaps in his family tree, because especially in his recent family ancestry, he had some very short DNA gaps, which were really interesting because at first I was like, I don't even know if this is real, because these seem like they're like unrealistically young when they had kids, But then with the DNA, I mean, the DNA proved very conclusively that it was them. It was either them or it would have been like some older sibling that for some reason they said, no, it's this younger sibling. But usually it's the opposite way, where if someone's really young and they have a kid, they say, oh, well, actually it's the older sibling or the mom or the grandparents that are the parents, but really it was the young. So I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, yeah, Drew should do a react to this video. That would be great. Although then I'll see another reaction video get way more views than my own video. Although it probably would get me a ton of stuff. Odd Danish mid-1800s, I think I spend a lot of time on. Yeah. And probably has to do with Mormon relationships. Well, that side was actually, I think that one was his dad's side that I was thinking of. Although I think there was some Mormon connection, if I remember correctly, on his dad's side. If they are a lot of Mormons, it makes sense. There's a culture there of young mothers. Yeah.
With both my grandma and her mom, my great-grandma. So I was able to obtain pretty good amount of information. Obviously, a lot more from my grandma, Linda. But the basics to her upbringing was that she was born in Salt Lake City, and she might have been raised Mormon. I'm still not entirely sure about that one.
She definitely wasn't Mormon later in life, but maybe as a kid. Yeah, I do think that I credit her with the reason why I'm such a geography nerd.
Hearing about the Mayflower from her, that was probably the first time I'd heard of that ship. She would teach me a little bit.
She talked about World War II a lot.
Just about history.
I mean, again, I was like 8 years old, so this was going right over my head.
In general, and maybe that's where that honestly might be what sparked my interest.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know why she was telling like a 6 or 7 year old this stuff, but I guess I found it fascinating.
I still don't really know. I always ask other family members. Apparently, she did a lot during World War II. Like, she went to Europe multiple times, and I think she was working in it was definitely with planes. It was definitely certain plane manufacturers, Boeing or something like that.
I looked so many places to try to find information, and I just never found it. And there was some stuff that I've been like, there's some stuff that I've been trying to work on more, and like getting like some of the harder to find records. But part of it is that it was just a lot of generalized, like, might have worked with planes, might have been here, traveled abroad, and like I couldn't find any, passenger lists or anything like that. And yeah, I don't know. That was a consideration. It does sound like she might have done classified stuff. It's possible, but I wasn't sure. It was also my thought was maybe she worked with the oh gosh, what the whatever show that they call it, but like they're like the group of people that go abroad to give stuff to soldiers, like hand out drinks and stuff. And like, I think they had a scene of that. If you ever saw the Pacific, where it's like they're getting back from battle to the base, and they're like, battle torn and everything. And they're walking up, and there are these, hot chicks in nurse outfits handing out, cups of drinks and stuff. And it's like just such a, mind, yeah, mind, whatever. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, this is her.
Drew's great-grandmother Vera was born on May 18th, 1927. I loved finding this picture. And I will say, some of the stuff I found that I was like so hoping I'd get a really big reaction from him, I didn't get quite as big of a reaction, but there was some stuff that I was like, I wonder what his parents are going to think, because I found some really good photos and videos of his family that I was like, oh, this is going to surprise them. And I posted this photo of him with his grandmother way back. But one of the things that he didn't make note of, and maybe he didn't see it, was, so I show this photo of him with his great grandmother, and then after that, I show a photo of his grandmother as a baby with her mom, and I just thought they looked so alike. So like, here's like Drew as a little kid with his great grandmother, Salt Lake City, and there's his great grandmother. Like, to me, it's like they both had such a similar like kind of face. I don't know, maybe it's just that kind of baby face sort of thing, but there was just something about it that I thought, I don't know. In Salt Lake City to Stanley Pitts Russell and Iva Hattie Weston Scout.
This is crazy. I was actually just asking how do you say that? My grandma's brother. So is that uncle? About what he remembered about his grandma and his great grandma. Maybe some of this will ring a bell.
Stanley was a first generation American with both of his. And this is his family. This is video of his family. I'd found some film that one of his cousins had put up online kind of discreetly somewhere, but I was able to figure out where it was. And I got a lot of it. And I wasn't 100% sure of who was who. This was one of the roadblocks I ran into. I kept trying to contact relatives and be like, can you just tell me which one's Vera, which one's Stanley, who's Hattie, and I couldn't find anyone. So I had to go by context clues of various things. And I thought I figured it out, but I wasn't 100% sure. Cause like here on screen, that was either his Drew's great grandmother, Iva Hattie, or it was her sister, June. And then this, I think, was Stanley, but I couldn't remember. Parents having been born in England. That was for sure.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. So my great-great-grandpa was first generation. That doesn't go as far back as I thought. I thought we had been here for a minute.
Yeah, that was really recent English. And, well, yeah. Father Stanley was a first-generation American with both of his parents having been born
that's
in
Stanley,
England.
I think. Wow.
Vera's mother, Iva Hattie, who also went by Hattie or Harriet, was born in Utah in 1907.
I think I remember hearing about this lady's name, actually.
John Weston Scow and Susanna Cheshire.
I'm like trying to map this out in my head. If I have heard from the older generations this name, I think I did.
The fourth of 11 children. So he actually had a double cousin relationship in his family, where Iva Hattie, his second great grandmother, married a Russell. And then June, born in 1919, also married a Russell. So Drew's family are double cousins to June's family, because they're cousins through June and Hattie, and then cousins through the Russell.
Dang! Wow, and there's a lot of, they had a ton of daughters, like 3 boys.
Stanley and Harriet would go on. This was my favorite picture that I found, because this is his grandmother. His grandmother's brother, the one he was saying that the guy he was talking to before, and then their younger sister. And I mean, look at how much his great uncle looks like. I mean, that's the similarity between Drew and his great uncle, at least in this photo. But it was just such a cool photo because this is them hanging out 1940s Compton on the car.
Such
They
an
have
awesome
two more
picture.
children, a son and another
That is a crazy picture. I love the old car in the background.
daughter. I would have loved to see the reactions of his like mom and his grandmother's siblings, because his grandmother has unfortunately passed away not too long ago, a few years ago, I think, if I remember correctly. But yeah, his like some of her siblings are alive, and then obviously, he's got a lot of other family members and stuff too. And so I was actually saying to him, and I say to all of my guests, I'm like, if you have family members who would want to react to this, I would love to have that, because especially with the family members that are older, they're the ones that I would think would, more of this stuff would be like, oh my gosh, I remember this and this and this, which is one of the reasons why, if you've never interviewed family members about your family, highly recommend doing it and just going through what you found, because sometimes you'll be surprised the stories that they'll be reminded of that no one ever asked me. I never thought to tell. Stanley worked as a roof shingler in Salt Lake City, but in the late 1930s, the family moved to Compton and Los Angeles. And so that's his grandparents, if I remember correctly, over here on the left. Stanley would pass away in 1972.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously never met him. My great grandpa, I mean, I wasn't even close.
Patty would pass away in 1994.
Oh, wow. I mean, I could have met her. I don't think I did. I was 2
years after Drew was born. He probably did meet her and just doesn't remember, or at the very least, they were at gatherings together, I'm sure, because I mean, the whole family lived in both of Harry's parents were born in Utah, which made sense because Drew had told me that he believed this line of the family had been part of the Mormon Church. So my next step was to confirm if that was true. Lucky for our research, the Mormon Church, or what they documented it, called the
darkest chapters.
A lot of ads on this. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But sometimes just goes. We're 7.5 minutes in. We've already had like the LDS Church are heavily involved in genealogy.
Oh wow,
now,
that's
this
cool.
Is connected to the LDS Church's belief in proxy baptisms, which are basically baptizing already deceased people. Vera's family shows up in these various church records, and I even found Vera in the 1935 church census records. This connection to the church likely meant that the family already had an extensive family tree built out.
Wow.
And even more likely, it was being hosted on the church's genealogy website, Families.
Their side of the family was like super more. There's a lot. Oh, well, like he was saying, they might have been baptizing post, what's that called? After death?
Which is a free website which hosts billions of digital records, as well as a collaborative family tree. A collaborative family tree means that everyone works from the same family tree. So if two people end up putting the same person in their family trees, that is then merged together. This is actually the same type of thing that Genie.com and WikiTree do as well.
That makes sense.
But being that Family Search is the LDS Church's website, it has become the central hub of the 3 collaborative trees with the most information on LDS Church families. I quickly found the family in the Family Search tree, and the amount of information connected to the tree.
Yeah, I know some of these people. I don't know who has it all, but I remember my great grandma Vera. She like hoarded a lot of stuff, and if I can only find that stuff, she probably has old pictures somewhere. Actually, my parents might have that stuff. I should have looked for that.
Extremely expansive with.
Yeah, I know that my great grandma's husband died like really young, and she never remarried. He just like had a heart attack on the couch.
And unique records attached. The first thing to catch my eye was that Harriet's paternal grandparents were born in Denmark.
Wow. So we have my great grandfather's side born in England, and then my great grandma's side, great great grandma's side, yeah, great, add one more great in there, born in Denmark. That's
yeah. Well, actually, to be more specific on that part, the Weston Scout side was from Denmark. If I remember correctly, the Cheshire side was also from England. It was just like a generation or two back when they actually came over. So it's really only the Weston Scout line that I found that he had Danish ancestry. and everything else was just all his other Mormon ancestry.
That's really interesting because every time I would talk about my Nordic ancestry, whenever that would come back with that data, I always, as you probably should, you go back to like the Viking days, when the Viking invasion of the British Isles was happening, because a lot of people from the British Isles have lineage to the Nordics because of the Vikings. But to see that there was a direct line, not even that far away, it's like, wow.
Into their story,
it's not like I'm just 1%
Harriet's grandfather
from the Nordic countries, I guess.
Hans Olsen Westenskow.
Can I do the percentages now? I mean, this is only one line on my tree, but since we now have data on this, 20.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with the DNA percentages that people should do is have kind of a basic family tree. Obviously, not everyone knows how to build a family tree. It does take some skill, I guess, to do that. But, having just a bare bones of, back to your grandparents or great grandparents or, as far back as possible, really on as many lines as possible. But the more you know, that's how you can kind of make more sense of the admixture results. So kind of like what he's doing here with like trying to remember what were the percentages he had. But yeah, you can kind of do that because I think it was Hans Olsen Weston, or his most recent fully Danish ancestor, who was let's go back a little bit. John Westenskow, that's his third great grandparent. So when we're kind of thinking of how much do you inherit from each person or ancestor, 25% from a grandparent, 12.5% from a great, 6.25 from a second great, which would be Harriet, and then John Westenskow, that'd be about 3.175, I think that is, or I don't know, so 3 point some odd percentage. Actually, here, I always forget I have this. There we go. So 3.125. So you can, that's what you'd expect. So that if you were figuring out, well, how much would I get, assuming there was no, recombination was perfect, no randomness to it, it would be 3.125%. Drew's fourth great grandfather was a well-documented figure in the LDS church history and had led quite an interesting life.
1835. This also gives interesting perspective on like the Civil War times. If they're in Utah, I don't really know what they was doing. They was just chilling over here doing nothing in the Utah territory.
One of the things I loved about Drew's reaction was it was a lot of commentary of like, well, I guess I wonder what this would be like. And then it's something I cover later in the video. And that made me really happy because it just made me think like, okay, I am hitting all the questions that people have, which is what I really wanted to do with the narrative style of like, as you're going through, you're like, okay, well, what about that? And then all of a sudden it's like, here's the answer. Oh, sweet. So it's like a lot of the stuff he's like, I wonder what, how did they get there? And what did they do? And it's like, I covered all of that. Hans started learning violin at the age of 7. By age 9, he was playing dances alongside his father. By the age of 12, he was playing parties all by himself.
That is cool. I was playing in a band before I really started YouTube. I liked music a lot. I guess this is
Hans's brother Peter
connection here.
The same. There are so many YouTubers who are in bands or who have been in bands, and I think there's been a running joke amongst a lot of us that we need to have a YouTuber band of just because I used to be in bands. Mr. Beat was in bands. I know that there's like a whole bunch of other people that are at least musical. A lot of other YouTubers are musical, at least in the history educational sort of space. Brothers traveling to neighboring towns to play parties and dances. When Hans was born, his family was part of the Lutheran Church. While Hans hadn't been very religious, he did have a few religious experiences in his youth. In Hans's autobiography, he talks about the first time
he has an
he heard
autobiography
priest in 1851, and he says,
"This is clearly a big member of the Mormon Church, I guess."
Mormonism from that time until I embraced it.
It wasn't until years later in 1862 that Hans and his brother were baptized into the Mormon Church.
Wow.
At that point, Hans
in Denmark, I'm wondering, like, or did he go to? When does he go to Utah?
Married for a few.
Oh no, I don't think maybe he doesn't.
Years and had a 1-year-old son named Ulla. Just a year later, in 1863, Hans left for Utah with his wife,
there you go.
who was pregnant, and son.
Wow, what a time to go to the U.S. I guess we're going to get into this.
Brother Peter had been called to serve in the Danish army to fight Germany over the Schleswig-Holstein region. Yeah, I actually had started to try to research further into the brothers' involvement, Peter's involvement in the Schleswig-Holstein War. If I remember correctly, I think it was because there were 3 of them. I can't remember which one it was that he fought in. Obviously, it's whichever one took place in 1863, or I think it was, or one, or I don't know, 1860s. But I ended up having to like cut that because I was like, yeah, I think I'm already adding a little too much. To
I was
this
literally
story.
just thinking about this. Like, oh wow, that brings a whole new context to that war.
For only 10 weeks, but fighting in 8 battles.
Wow.
Shortly after Peter finished his service in the army in
Oh, he didn't die.
1864, he left for America.
1864, a year later.
Their sister Magdalena, who also went by Lena, would join them just a few months later. Something especially important to Lena is she had promised their mother on her deathbed that she would stay with her brothers. Well, this was all turning out to be quite an interesting story. Now, that actually, I talk about the 3 siblings, but there were other half siblings of theirs. There was a half sibling through their father, and I think there was also a half sibling through their mother too. I can't remember for sure, but it was kind of a interesting family dynamic. But it was the 3 full siblings that all came to the U.S. I wanted to understand the overall history connected to this, so I had a lot of questions to answer. What were Mormon priests doing in Denmark in the 1850s?
That is so interesting.
How long had they been there?
They were
By
clearly
learning the larger history of the area, that might be helpful in understanding Hans's story.
They must have been sending out missions. I mean, they do missions still, but to see that they were doing missions in the 1800s, crazy that the LDS Church only was founded in 1830. So all this happened like 2 to 3 decades. They were already going to Denmark recruiting people.
To Professor Lynn Henriksen from Brigham Young University to help me understand
BYU,
the history
that's right.
a bit better.
Hello, my name is Lynn Henriksen. I'm a retired professor of linguistics and English
I've
language
always liked BYU's football team. I will say that.
Brigham Young University.
I love college
As you
football.
might guess from my last name, Henriksen, I am Scandinavian, Danish. So I've had an interest in my Danish ancestry for many years.
I did this interview with Lynn Henriksen probably like 6 or 8 months before the final video came out, maybe even longer. And because like I said, this was probably one of the longest ones in terms of how long it took me to finally get it out. I have some other YouTubers where it's taking a lot of research, but like I haven't really even hit the point of kind of writing the episodes. With Drew's, I'd started kind of to get the episode written, and then things really hit.
They look
the
at
wall.
other aspects of language, but I have studied different languages, about 9. The last one of all has been Danish, my ancestral language.
Wow.
And so that began, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And
I'm remembering all the memes about Danish language, something about like it sounds like there's a potato in your throat. That's so funny because now that comes back to me. Apparently,
studying that language allowed me to create this specialty on Danish immigrants
what's really
in the United States. It wasn't until 1850 that the Danish Constitution was amended to allow for freedom of religion.
His mitochondrial line
that
is
led to
not
an opening
Danish.
For representatives of other religions to come in and proselytize. And among them were the missionaries. We say Mormon. The official name of the church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The church leaders were actively sending out missionaries to the world. The church was organized.
This photograph, I try to be as on point as possible with what I showed. And this photograph was like one of the first known missionaries for the Mormon church. I forgot what his name was, but like this was like early on sort of thing. So
by this time, the Latter-day Saints had been moved from New York to Ohio to Illinois to Missouri.
They got pushed further and further out east or west.
Across the plains to Utah.
Wow.
In 1847.
Settled on Salt Lake City.
1850,
this is random, but I remember just my grandma's, just my mom's mom. She always wanted to return and live out the rest of her life in Salt Lake City. That's something that she always would say. She loved Salt Lake City.
Despite their difficult circumstances in a new land, and they started sending missionaries out again. So there was a real need for people felt pressure and the need because of the Latter-day Saint idea that these are the latter days. Christ is coming soon, and we need to gather to be in a safe place. 46,000 that converted.
Utah Scandinavian population. Wow. Most were from Denmark and then Sweden, Norway. Norway started getting their numbers up a little bit, but not that much.
At least 26,000 migrated to Utah. And in those days, Utah didn't have
wow.
that
So this guy, I think we're talking about my great-great-grandpa or great-great-great.
Yeah, and they would have been in the 1860s one. So you can see that in the 1860s, very few from Sweden or Norway, mostly from Denmark. The ones from Sweden and Norway don't really start to pick up until the 1870s.
I don't know 3, but he must have been one of the first, one of these 1800s.
So this was quite an increase in the population.
There was 2
Eventually, they
in 1850.
composed 9% of the population, which is a pretty large minority.
Hans's trip to Utah was only briefly mentioned in his own writings, but his sister Lena documented her own trip quite well in 1864.
Ooh. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That is
The Mormon missionaries helped fund Lena's trip with something called the perpetual emigration.
Man, they must have had some money because this would cost a lot, I feel. Bring all these people back to Utah.
The group Lena traveled with had about 350 people altogether, all of whom were described as converts.
Putting them in the bottom of the ship, maybe?
They first sailed to England, taking a 3-day trip, which had heavy rain almost the entire time.
The North Sea is not a good place to go. That's what I keep seeing TikToks about that. The North Sea is terrifying.
Making many of them sick. They landed on the east coast of England and took a train to Liverpool before continuing their journey to America.
Man, I don't even like to do 12-hour plane rides. Can you imagine this? This is definitely taking like 6 weeks.
America had 9. I really tried to play it out at this part to really get the emphasis of like it was a long way and like each part had its own section. 974 passengers, and Lena described the ship's crew as rough and ill-tempered.
I mean,
Lena had befriended some.
I think I would be too if I was on a ship all the time like that.
They were all conned on the trip by an elderly man who pretended to be a missionary and said they could entrust him to keep their valuables safe. Instead, after they gave him their valuables, he disappeared and was never seen again.
Oh, yeah. I'm not surprised. There's probably a lot of people did that stuff.
After a grueling 2-month journey, Lena's group landed at Castle Garden in New York. They then traveled by steamboat to Albany before taking a train west.
Wow.
The converts weren't well treated on this trip, and because this was during the Civil War, the group found themselves in cattle cars so the active soldiers could take the nicer cars. Once they arrived at the Missouri River,
assuming they stayed out of the South at this time, probably
another steamboat
or anywhere
up
near
to Wyoming.
The fighting.
In Wyoming, that was an interesting comment when he made that because I was like, I don't know if I found anything kind of saying about them avoiding certain areas, but it certainly makes sense that, make sure you don't go through active battle zones. Granted, an active battle zone during the Civil War, a little bit different than an active battle zone today, but still kind of an interesting thought. But for the most part, there were multiple kind of trails in a sense, but they all kind of seem to go about this. Wyoming, they then joined a company of immigrants led by missionary William B. Preston, and then had to travel the last 1,000 miles on foot.
Oh my goodness.
Every once in a while, Lena would pull out her violin to play for everybody. Along the way, Lena fell in love with a man named Marcus Funk, and they'd be engaged before the trip's end.
Wow.
They finally made it
That's
to their
one way
destination.
to bond with someone. Going through a journey like that, walking 1,000 miles.
On September 15th, 1864, having started their trip on April 22nd, 1864. Taking just under 5 months to travel about 5,200 miles.
5 months. Okay, yeah, that's a lot longer than 6 weeks. That wouldn't be fun.
Had English classes in Denmark before they came.
Oh, that's
they
a smart idea. Start teaching them English on the trip.
In Danish for them to help them know as they were traveling across the ocean and across the plains and so forth, what to expect, what to come prepared with. Most of them went on ships, maybe to Liverpool, which was a major disembarkation point from the continent or from Europe. The early ones, I guess, went on sailing ships, but more often in the later years, after the 1850s, they came on steamships. And they would arrive either in New York City or Boston, perhaps. And in many cases, they would go all the way down and then come up the Mississippi River to St. Louis. The early arrivals had to walk or go by horseback or in wagons, and the covered wagons we see in cowboy movies, up until 1869. One interesting thing about the
Oregon
Danish
Trail.
immigration in the years before the railroad was
literally
that
that.
they were known for using hand carts, which were small wagons with no horse, no ox, just a man or a woman or both.
Wow.
Maybe their children pushing and pulling.
These people had to be buff.
Children's Mormon hymn also. For some must push and some must pull as we go marching up the hill. And verily on our way we go until we reach the valley. Oh,
yeah, singing would...
I don't know why.
Singing probably makes the journey a little bit more bearable.
Hans had arrived almost the singing chorus, the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. That I don't know why I thought that was a great
1 year
transition. I
prior
was
to his
really
sister
happy about
Lena.
it.
Now you all
Hans
know.
mentions in his autobiography that he paid for the passage of 13 others, 11 in Falster and 2 more in Liverpool.
Was that
Hans's group
$150?
arrived
I wonder what that translates to. $18.50, $150? I mean, that's thousands.
in Newark on June 13th, but weren't allowed ashore until June 15th. They quickly boarded a train to
That's
Albany
probably
and arrived 1
$10,000.
day later. The same day that they arrived in Albany, Hans's second son Peter was born. They then took a train to Florence, Nebraska, but not long after arriving in Florence, on July 2nd, Hans's first son Ule died at just over a year and a half.
Oh yeah, that little kid from the picture.
Just 4 days after the death of their son, Hans and his family left Florence, Nebraska with the John Franklin Sanders Company. Hans, I would find that so difficult to like have your, 2-year-old baby die. And then it's like, all right, a few days later, now we've got to leave where we buried our 2-year-old son. And, I kind of wonder if they ever went or even knew where they buried him and like went and visited the grave or something. This group finally arrived at their destination on
Nebraska.
September 5th, 1863. Well, it took these
3-month
newcomers a
journey.
little while to get set up. They were expected to become productive very quickly. Professor
Dang,
Henriksen
you just got
told
done with this 5-month journey. It's like, all right, guys, it's time to get to work.
me about an interesting
Start building
Brigham
them
Young
houses.
speech given to a group of new arrivals, which highlights this sentiment.
Brothers and sisters of the Lord Jesus Christ, you have been chosen from the world by God and sent through his grace
Man, this guy's
into this valley
beard
of the
is
mountains
crazy.
to help in building up his kingdom.
I love
You are
Bruce
faint and
comments
weary
about
from your
the
march.
facial hair.
Rest
It's
then
so funny.
for a day, for a second day should you need it. Then rise up and
You get
see
2
how you will
days.
live. Be of good cheer. Look about this valley. Your first duty is to learn how to grow a cabbage. And along with this cabbage,
mean,
an onion, a tomato, a
I
sweet
guess this is kind of
potato.
important to be
Then
learning how to grow
feed
food.
a pig, to build a house. The next duty for those who, being Danes, French, and Swiss, but who cannot speak it now, is to learn the English language, the language of God, the language of the Book of Mormon, the language of the latter days. People who study this say they face three major enemies. Okay? One was
Disease.
the climate.
Okay.
They came from Northern Europe. It was
Cold.
a lot more moist there. It was cooler. Now they were in the Great American Desert. Another enemy was the Native Americans, although they didn't have so much trouble getting along with them as they thought they would. In fact, some of the Scandinavians learned more Indian language than they learned English.
That's
especially the
hilarious. I
children.
mean, they weren't
But the
that far
third
away from the Comanche, right? I mean, that would be pretty terrifying.
enemy
What are the Ute, which is why I believe it's called Utah.
was the English language.
Ute.
And they really struggled with English, even though Danish and English
Obviously, I get into
are,
with the Indian War stuff coming up.
related languages with common Germanic ancestor.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like learning, going from like Chinese or Japanese to English. I mean, there's very little connection there.
This was very important for them to be able to integrate into the communities, become part of the kingdom of God in Utah. Brigham Young declared English was the language of God. I was mentioned here.
The guy from
Sociolinguists
BYU.
have all noted that different religious groups
The guy,
have often
the naming.
regarded the particular language as central to their faith. And so for these Latter-day Saints, English was very important. It was the language of the Book of Mormon. It was the language of the gathering.
I didn't
And
realize
so
how
it
important English was to
for the
Mormons.
Scandinavians
That
to learn
makes sense.
English. And they wanted to, but that doesn't mean it was easy for them.
Hans, Peter, and Lena would continue their work as musicians, and in 1866, Hans
I like how these two have
Peter
the same
joined the
beards. Is that
militia
just the
as
style?
musicians to fight in Black Hawk's War.
Oh yeah,
The war
I've heard about
started
this.
in 1865. But the conflicts between the Mormon pioneers and the Native Americans dated back to the 1840s.
This guy got shades on?
Relations between the pioneers and natives had been
crazy.
very peaceful at first. The Mormons wanted to be friendly and helpful to the natives because they saw it was in their own best interest. With Brigham Young once saying,
This
"It is
had to have been the
cheaper
style to
feed
shave your
them than
mustache,
fight
right?
them." Even more so, the Mormons viewed Native Americans in a special light because the Mormons believed Native Americans were a lost tribe of Israel. Native Americans viewed the Mormons as outcasts and were initially friendly with these pioneers. Relations slowly soured over the years, and multiple massacres happened throughout the 1840s and 1850s, with Mormon pioneers even taking some Native Americans as slaves, including women and children. By the time Hans and his siblings had arrived
this was
in
still
Utah,
before the slavery.
hundreds of Native Americans had already been
1865.
killed and I have to say it was very difficult to research this war, this this Black Ox War, because there's technically multiple of them. But part of it was that it seemed to be there was contradictory stuff between sources, and especially like sources would claim stuff, and then I'd try to look into the citations, and either I'd find stuff where just like there weren't very good citations, or the citations led to something that didn't seem to add up to what that person was saying. And I remember one of the things that was a part of that was the whole, taking women and children as slaves. And so I was like trying to find specific accounts of stuff, and I kept running into different things of when people were taken as slaves and who was taken as a slave. And so I was like, I'm not gonna get into that, because that would require really, really in-depth research. And by the time I had gotten to this point of writing the script, it was like I was already like a year behind. So it was like, okay, I can't get too hardcore into it. Enslaved, as well as 8 Mormon settlers having been killed, 4 of whom had been Danish immigrants still on their journey from Denmark on a similar path that Hans took. Things really began to get worse in the summer of 1863, right before Hans and his family would arrive. The family's first few years in Utah would include multiple fights between the settlers and Native Americans, eventually leading to Black Hawk's War. I basically found no reference to Hans and Peter's experiences in the war, with their biographies and obituaries mentioning this only as a small blurb. But their pension records
that's probably
show
a good
both
thing.
of them served for 1 year and 8 months as musicians.
Really? Were they the drummer boys? Oh man,
Yep.
I was just making jokes about those memes. When you're playing your flute and your homie gets shot in the chest, you're like crying, but you still have to keep playing.
Peter continued their focus on music by running choirs, orchestras, and other musical organizations throughout the area. Hans and his wife Karen would have many children together, but at this time it was commonplace for men in the church to take multiple wives. Hans was urged by his wife to take a second wife. Now, what's interesting about this story of his wife urging him to take a second wife is that this was written about by children from the first marriage, and their in their biographies of the family. And one of the children, who I talk about in a bit in the video, he writes like pretty specifically about the event, like with like the conversation they had about it, or at least what he heard, which he did in April
by his own wife,
1869, marrying Karen Elizabeth Hansen, and it would be through this marriage that Drew descends from Hans.
Oh dang! To the
I also
second
thought
wife.
it was interesting that both of his wives were named Karen, and I imagine that
oldest. Dang, to the
I also
second
thought
wife.
it was interesting to be through this marriage that Drew. So that's John Weston Scow. That's his second. That's his third great grandfather. Drew's most recent fully Danish ancestor. Drew descends from Hans.
Oh dang! To the
I also
second
thought
wife.
it was interesting that both of his wives were named Karen, and I imagine that must have been somewhat confusing throughout the house.
I think that makes it a lot easier. Karen wins dinner. They'll both give you answers.
Hans and his second wife would have multiple children together, including Drew's ancestor John Weston Scow. The Edmunds-Tucker Act was a law which attacked polygamy by going after the LDS Church and the Perpetual Immigration Fund. This law was actually an extension of a previous law from definitely something I noticed in my research, known as the Edmunds Anti-Polygamy LDS Act, sources, non-LDS sources, which basically banned polygamy and took away rights from polygamists, including voting, holding public office, and even serving on juries. The 1887 laws were enacted due to the lack of control the previous law had over polygamy, so this new law disincorporated the church and the Perpetual Immigration Fund. The Perpetual Immigration Fund was the same fund which helped finance Lena Weston Scow's trip from Denmark to Utah.
So they weren't sent.
This law also took away the rights of women to vote. That's right. In Utah from 1870 up until 1887, women had the right to vote. A law which had been passed by the Utah territorial legislature. The Edmunds-Tucker Act included all women, not just those in polygamous marriages. I even found a public statement from famous women's suffrage fighter Susan B. Anthony opposing the bill and calling it obnoxious.
Dang.
One stipulation with this act was the requirement for civil marriage licenses. This is how I learned that it wasn't uncommon for Mormon couples to have a marriage recognized by the church, known as a celestial marriage, before they had a marriage recognized legally.
Oh,
He
yeah.
had been, which I didn't want to say in the video, but I later, well, I guess technically it was a little bit later that I really found it out, but I learned from a lot of people in the LDS church that it was like, really was not uncommon for people to just have celestial marriages and not even recorded civilly. The Tucker Act became law on March 3rd, 1887, and Hans officially married his second wife. When I found this newspaper, I thought about putting Nelson, like an image of Nelson from The Simpsons up, just like pointing the that's it right there. But as you know, President Cleveland has placed his signature to the Edmunds-Tucker bill. The news received with the acclamations of joy on every hand.
Karen, there's so many newspaper clips here. That's amazing.
Later, in
found
October
all these.
of 1887. While I don't have confirmation that this is the reason, it seemed like
a little bit of full
Hans's
history
first
too.
wife died in 1884, just 3 weeks shy of her 45th birthday. Hans's second wife took care of all the children, 9 children from the first marriage and 3 children from the second marriage.
Dang, these kids they all have the same exact face. That's crazy. That doesn't even look real.
William Weston Scow, the youngest son from the first marriage, wrote about his stepmother saying, "I can truthfully say that she was always a good mother to us."
Wow.
He's the one, William Henry Weston Scow, who I'm pretty sure who his biography talks about his mom telling his dad, "Yeah, you need a second wife, dude." Hans would begin working in the which I kind of wonder, like, did she have some sort of other motivation of like, oh my gosh, this guy's so annoying, get some other woman in Thai Temple in 1888, helping people with their genealogy. Wow. I think this adds a really interesting layer to the entire story.
Twist.
And that a lot of the research and work Hans did in the temple likely helped preserve a lot of the family history researched for this video.
Yeah,
Hans would
that's
work
crazy.
at the temple until his death in 1919 at the age of 83.
Dang.
Notice his wife, Anne, or the listing of his parents, Ulla Hansen Vestenskow and Annie Hans.
He lived for so long.
To have died from natural causes.
1919, man, and this is the time period where people weren't necessarily living that long.
Hans's
right after World
siblings,
War I.
Peter and Lena, would also lead very fulfilling lives with many descendants and a strong legacy. Peter died in 1911 at the age of 73 due to a heart disease, having a total of 19 children with 2 wives, 11 through his first marriage and 8 through his second marriage. With all but 2 making it to adulthood. Lena would die in 1928 at the age of
overall, that's
88,
pretty good numbers. Only 2 didn't make it.
11 children,
so
with
Californian.
8 making it to adulthood.
Wow.
Drew had also done a DNA test, so I wanted to check out this line that we had built for the Weston Scow family against his DNA matches.
Ooh.
Just using through lines, Drew had 18 genetic matches who also descended from Drew's 3rd great-grandfather, John Weston Scow. 42 matches through his 4th great-grandfather, Hans Weston Scow, and 60 matches through his 5th great-grandfather, Ulle, the 3 siblings. Most recent ancestor of Drew's on this line to have been born and died in Denmark. Helping confirm everything we had built for this part of Drew's family.
So I got a cousin in Denmark. I got to go find those fools.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this reaction, be sure to click right here to see another. Thank you to my Patreon patrons and YouTube members.